Some stories will shake you to your core. This is one of them. A young woman named Amara was accused of something she didn't do, simply because of the color of her skin. No evidence, no trial, just guilt by existence. But what she did next shocked everyone. Let's begin. The morning sun barely touched the cotton fields when Amara's hands were already bleeding. She was 14 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. The overseer's whip cracked in the distance, and she flinched, though it wasn't meant for her this time. Her mother had died 3 months ago. No, not died, sold. Sold away before Amara could say goodbye. Now she was alone, truly alone in a world that saw her as nothing more than property. The heat was unbearable. Sweat mixed with blood on her fingertips as she picked cotton faster and faster, trying to meet the impossible quota set by men who would never know what it felt like to have your humanity stripped away with every passing second. Around her, dozens of other enslaved people worked in silence. No one spoke. Speaking got you whipped. Slowing down got you beaten. Resisting got you killed. A shadow fell across Amara's face. She knew that shadow. It belonged to Overseer Daniels, a man whose cruelty was legendary even among the other plantation owners. He stood there, blocking the sun, his whip coiled in his hand like a sleeping snake ready to strike. "You girl," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can slow down on my watch?" Amara's fingers trembled as she picked faster, her back screaming in pain. She didn't look up. She never looked up. Looking an overseer in the eye was an invitation for violence. "I said look at me when I'm talking to you," Daniels shouted. He grabbed her by the arm and yanked her around so violently that she nearly lost her balance. His breath reeked of whiskey and hatred, a combination that had become all too familiar to everyone on the plantation. "Yes, sir," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She kept her eyes fixed on a spot just past his shoulder, not quite meeting his gaze but giving the appearance of obedience. Daniels shoved her backward into the dirt. She fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her lungs. "You people are lucky we even let you live," he snarled, standing over her like a predator over prey. "Remember that? You're nothing, less than nothing. And if you ever forget your place, I'll make sure you regret it for whatever short time you have left on this earth." Amara stayed on her knees for a moment, dirt clinging to her face and clothes. Around her, other enslaved workers kept their heads down, too afraid to stop picking, too afraid to show any sign of compassion. Caring about others got you punished. Showing emotion got you beaten. In this place, survival meant shutting down every human instinct and becoming a machine that worked until it broke. That night, in the cramped slave quarters that smelled of sweat, sickness, and despair, Amara sat alone in a corner, staring at the wooden walls that had become her prison. An older woman named Esther, whose back bore the scars of countless whippings, sat down beside her. Esther's hands were gnarled and worn, the hands of someone who had worked every day of her life since childhood. "You got that look in your eye, child," Esther said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The same look your mama had." Amara turned to look at the older woman. "What look?" she asked, her voice hollow and empty. "The look that says you ain't gonna let them break you," Esther replied, reaching out to take Amara's trembling hand in her own scarred one. "Not all the way, not where it counts. They can own your body, child, but they can't own your soul unless you let them." Amara felt tears welling up in her eyes. "What good does that do?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "We're still here, we're still slaves, we're still nothing. What difference does it make if I hold on to my soul when my body belongs to them?" Esther's grip on her hand tightened. "You listen to me, girl, and you listen good. You are not nothing. I don't care what they say. I don't care how they treat you. I don't care if they beat you every day for the rest of your life. You are a human being. You have worth. You have dignity. They can take everything from you, except that. Hold on to it. Hold on to who you are, deep down where they can't reach." Amara wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel that spark of humanity that Esther spoke of. But as she lay down on the cold, hard floor that night, listening to the sounds of other people crying softly in the darkness, all she felt was emptiness. An emptiness so vast and deep that it threatened to swallow her whole. But something Esther said stayed with her, a tiny seed of defiance planted in soil that had been burned and salted by years of brutality. It would take time to grow, but it was there, waiting for the right moment to break through the surface. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. Amara grew from a girl into a young woman, but the plantation remained the same. The same backbreaking labor, the same casual cruelty, the same dehumanizing treatment that wore down even the strongest spirits. She saw people die from exhaustion, from disease, from punishments so severe that their bodies simply gave out. She saw families torn apart, as children were sold away from parents, husbands separated from wives, siblings scattered to different plantations, never to see each other again. And through it all, Amara held on to that tiny seed of defiance that Esther had planted. She didn't know what it would grow into, but she protected it fiercely, nurturing it with every small act of resistance she could manage. A deliberately slow pace when the overseer wasn't looking. A whispered word of comfort to another enslaved person. A moment of rest stolen when she should have been working. These small acts didn't change her circumstances, but they reminded her that she was still human, still capable of choosing how she responded to the horror around her. But wait, this story doesn't end in the past, because over 170 years later, in a different place and a different time, history was about to repeat itself in the most shocking way. And what you're about to see will leave you speechless. Amara pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the Regency Grand Hotel, one of Los Angeles's most prestigious five-star establishments. The carpet was so thick and plush that it felt like walking on clouds. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm golden light across walls adorned with expensive artwork. Everything about this place screamed wealth and privilege, a world so far removed from Amara's own life that she sometimes felt like she was visiting another planet. But Amara wasn't here to admire the luxury. She was here to clean up after people who would never see her as fully human, who would never acknowledge her presence unless something went wrong. In that way, not much had changed in over a century and a half. The chains were gone, the whips were gone, but the fundamental disregard for her humanity remained. Room 507. She knocked softly on the door, using the back of her hand so as not to leave fingerprints on the polished wood. "Housekeeping," she called out. Her accent, thick, but her English clear. She had worked hard to improve her language skills since immigrating from Nigeria 5 years ago, taking night classes while working 2 jobs to send money back to her younger siblings. No answer came from inside the room. Amara waited the required 30 seconds, knocked again, then used her keycard to unlock the door. The electronic lock beeped, and she pushed the heavy door open, wheeling her cart inside. The room was a disaster. Champagne bottles lay scattered across the floor, some still half full, the expensive liquid staining the carpet. Designer clothes were thrown carelessly over chairs and draped across the bed. Makeup was smeared across the bathroom counter. Wet towels lay in puddles on the marble floor. It looked like a tornado had torn through the space, leaving chaos in its wake. Amara sighed and began her work, picking up towels and placing them in the laundry bag on her cart. She had learned not to judge the guests based on the state of their rooms. Rich people, she had discovered, often treated hotel rooms like their personal playgrounds, secure in the knowledge that someone else would clean up their messes. It was just another reminder of the vast gulf between their world and hers. She was bending down to pick up a champagne bottle when she heard footsteps behind her. The sound made her freeze. Guests weren't supposed to be in the room during cleaning. That was the whole point of housekeeping schedules. "Excuse me," came a sharp, cold voice that made Amara's skin prickle with instinctive wariness. She straightened up and turned around to find a tall white woman standing in the doorway. The woman was probably in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Amara made in 6 months. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her manicured nails gleaming. Everything about her screamed wealth and entitlement. Yes, ma'am, Amara said politely, forcing a smile onto her face even though something about this woman's expression made her deeply uncomfortable. How can I help you? The woman's eyes narrowed as she looked Amara up and down, her gaze filled with suspicion and something that looked disturbingly like disgust. Did you touch my jewelry? She demanded, her voice accusatory. Amara's heart sank. She knew where this was going. She had heard stories from other housekeepers, warnings about guests who would accuse staff of theft for no reason other than prejudice and the assumption that poor immigrants must be criminals. No, ma'am, she said carefully, keeping her voice calm and respectful. I just started cleaning. I haven't touched anything except the towels and bottles on the floor. The woman's face hardened. Well, something is missing, she said, her voice rising with each word. A very expensive diamond bracelet. And you're the only one who has been in here. Amara felt panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Mimaram, I promise you, I didn't take anything. I wouldn't do that. Perhaps you left it in the safe, or maybe in your luggage. Don't lie to me, the woman snapped, taking a step closer. Her voice was loud now, carrying down the hallway where other guests might hear. I know your type. You people come here, take our jobs, and then steal from us. You think you can just walk into our country and help yourselves to whatever you want. The words hit Amara like physical blows. You people. The same phrase that had been used against her ancestors in those cotton fields. The same dehumanizing language wrapped in a different accent, spoken in a different century, but carrying the same message: you are not one of us. You are less than us. You are guilty simply by existing. Ma'am, please. Amara tried again, hearing the desperation creeping into her own voice, despite her best efforts to stay professional. I didn't take your bracelet. You can search my cart, you can check the cameras. I haven't done anything wrong, but the woman wasn't listening. She had already pulled out her phone and was calling the front desk, her voice dripping with indignation as she reported the theft and demanded immediate action. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived. They were both large men, one white and one Latino, both wearing the hotel's security uniform with stern expressions on their faces. They didn't ask Amara for her side of the story. They didn't check the security cameras. They simply grabbed her by the arms and began escorting her out of the room, their grips firm enough to bruise. Please, Amara begged, tears now streaming down her face. I didn't do anything. Please just check the cameras. You'll see I'm telling the truth. But her protests fell on deaf ears. The guards marched her down the hallway, past other guests who stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. She could see it in their eyes, the immediate assumption of guilt, the readiness to believe the worst about her simply because of how she looked and the job she held. The hotel manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of disapproval, was waiting for them in his office. He didn't invite Amara to sit down. He simply stood behind his desk, arms crossed, and delivered his verdict with the cold efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Miss Johnson, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. We have a zero-tolerance policy for theft. You are terminated effective immediately. Please return your uniform and ID badge to security on your way out. But I didn't steal anything, Amara said, her voice breaking. Please, sir, just look at the security footage. It will prove I'm innocent. The manager shook his head. Mrs. Richardson is one of our most valued guests. She stays here regularly and spends a considerable amount of money at our establishment. We cannot afford to lose her patronage over this matter. Security will escort you out. Amara stood there staring at this man who was willing to destroy her life to protect the hotel's relationship with a wealthy guest. She thought about her rent that was due in 2 weeks. She thought about her younger sister's school fees back in Nigeria. She thought about how hard she had worked to build a life here, only to have it torn away in minutes because a rich white woman needed someone to blame for her own carelessness. The security guards led her outside through a back entrance, as if her very presence might contaminate the hotel's pristine lobby. They handed her a small cardboard box containing her few personal belongings, a photo of her family, a water bottle, a small Bible her mother had given her before she left Nigeria. Then they simply walked away, leaving her standing alone on the street corner with tears streaming down her face and her entire world crumbling around her. For several minutes, Amara just stood there, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except cry. The humiliation burned through her, like fire. The injustice of it all threatened to crush her under its weight. She had done nothing wrong, absolutely nothing, and yet she had been treated like a criminal, stripped of her job and her dignity without even the pretense of a fair investigation. But then something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the memory of Esther's words from so long ago, passed down through generations like a sacred trust. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of every injustice she had faced since coming to this country. Maybe it was simply the realization that she had nothing left to lose. Whatever it was, Amara felt that seed of defiance that had been planted so long ago finally break through the surface and bloom into something fierce and powerful. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The screen was cracked. She couldn't afford to replace it, but the camera still worked. She opened the video app, positioned the phone so her tear-stained face filled the frame, and pressed record. For a moment she just stared into the lens, gathering her thoughts, steadying her voice. Then she began to speak. "My name is Amara Johnson," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "And I was just fired from my job at the Regency Grand Hotel. I was accused of stealing a diamond bracelet from a guest's room. There was no evidence. There was no investigation. There was no trial. I was found guilty simply because of the color of my skin and because I am an immigrant doing a job that nobody else wants to do." She paused, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. "The guest who accused me looked at me and saw a thief. The hotel manager looked at me and saw someone disposable, someone whose word means nothing compared to the word of a wealthy white woman who spends money at his hotel. The security guards looked at me and saw someone who deserved to be thrown out on the street without even being allowed to defend myself." Her voice grew harder now, the pain transforming into righteous anger. "But I am not a thief. I am not disposable. I am not guilty of anything except trying to make an honest living in a country that promised opportunity but delivers discrimination. I came to America believing in the American dream, believing that hard work and integrity would be enough. But I have learned that for people who look like me, for immigrants like me, we are guilty until proven innocent. If we are ever given the chance to prove our innocence at all." Amara's hands steadied as she continued. "I am done being silent. I am done accepting injustice, as if it is normal. I am done pretending that this is okay. If you are watching this, if you are listening to my story, know that we are still here. We are still fighting. We are still refusing to be erased, to be silenced, to be treated as less than human. They tried to break us in the cotton fields. They tried to break us during Jim Crow. They try to break us now with their assumptions and accusations and systemic discrimination. But we will not be broken." She took a deep breath, staring directly into the camera with an intensity that seemed to burn through the screen. "To the woman who accused me, I hope your bracelet shows up in your suitcase where you probably left it. To the hotel manager who fired me without investigation, I hope you remember this moment when you talk about fairness and justice. And to everyone else who faces this kind of discrimination every single day, know that you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter." She ended the recording and, without allowing herself time to second-guess the decision, posted it to social media with a simple caption: "This is what injustice looks like in 2025. Share if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." Then she put her phone in her pocket, picked up her box of belongings, and started walking. She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew that she had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The video started slowly. A few dozen views in the first hour, a few hundred by the end of the day. But then something remarkable happened. People started sharing it. Not just friends and family, but strangers who were moved by Amara's story, who saw in her experience echoes of their own struggles with discrimination and injustice. The video was picked up by local news stations, then national ones. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 5 million times. Within a week, it had been seen by more than 20 million people around the world. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from people of every background. Other hotel workers shared their own stories of being falsely accused and unfairly treated. Immigrant rights groups rallied around Amara's case, using it as an example of the systemic discrimination that millions of people face every day. Civil rights organizations offered legal assistance. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $200,000 in just 3 days, more money than Amara had ever imagined having. But there was also backlash. Some people accused her of playing the race card, of making up the story for attention, of being a professional victim, trying to get sympathy and money. The woman who had accused her, Mrs. Richardson, gave interviews claiming that Amara was lying, that she was a thief trying to destroy an innocent person's reputation. The hotel released a statement defending their decision and standing by their valued guest. But then the security footage was leaked. A hotel employee, disgusted by what had happened, anonymously sent the recordings to multiple news outlets. The footage showed Amara entering the room, picking up bottles and towels from the floor, and never going anywhere near the dresser where Mrs. Richardson claimed her jewelry had been kept. It showed Mrs. Richardson returning to the room after Amara had been escorted out, searching through her luggage and pulling out the diamond bracelet that she had packed herself and forgotten about. The revelation was devastating for the hotel and for Mrs. Richardson. The video of her finding the bracelet in her own suitcase went viral almost as quickly as Amara's original post. The hotel was flooded with one-star reviews and threats of boycotts. Mrs. Richardson faced a torrent of criticism and ridicule on social media. Several major companies announced they would no longer hold conferences or events at the Regency Grand. The hotel's corporate headquarters reached out to Amara with a formal apology and an offer to reinstate her with back pay, a promotion, and a substantial settlement. The manager who had fired her was quietly let go. Mrs. Richardson issued a public apology that felt hollow and forced, clearly written by lawyers trying to minimize further damage. Amara considered the hotel's offer carefully. The money would be life-changing. The promotion would give her opportunities she had never dreamed possible. But as she sat in her small apartment, reading through the thousands of messages from people whose lives had been touched by her story, she realized that she had been given a different kind of opportunity, one that was far more important than any job or paycheck. She declined the hotel's offer. Instead, she used the money from the GoFundMe campaign and legal settlement to establish a non-profit organization called Esther's Voice, named after the woman who had taught her ancestor that dignity and humanity could never be taken away, no matter how hard people tried. The organization provided legal assistance, job training, and emotional support for African immigrants facing workplace discrimination and false accusations. Esther's Voice grew quickly, fueled by the attention from Amara's viral video and the desperate need for the services it provided. Within a year, the organization had helped over 500 people fight back against unjust terminations, discriminatory treatment, and false accusations. Within 2 years, it had expanded to 6 cities across the United States. Within 3 years, it had become a national movement, with chapters in every state and partnerships with major civil rights organizations. Amara became a sought-after speaker, invited to conferences, universities, and corporate events to share her story and advocate for change. She spoke about the parallels between historical oppression and modern discrimination, about how the same attitudes that justified slavery continued to justify treating immigrants and people of color as less than fully human. She challenged audiences to examine their own biases and to actively work against systems of injustice rather than simply believing themselves to be not racist. 5 years after that devastating day outside the hotel, Amara stood on a stage before thousands of people at a civil rights conference in Washington, D.C. She looked out at the sea of faces, people of every race and background who had come to hear her speak, and felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on her shoulders. From the cotton fields of 1850 to the marble floors of luxury hotels in 2025, she began, her voice strong and clear. The story of my people is a story of resilience, of refusing to be broken, no matter how many times the world tries to break us. My ancestor Amara picked cotton under the whip of an overseer who told her she was nothing. 175 years later, I pushed a cleaning cart down hallways where guests looked through me as if I didn't exist. Different time, different place. Same message: you are less than us. You don't matter. You have no voice. She paused, letting her words sink in. But here is what they didn't understand then, and what they don't understand now. You cannot take away someone's humanity, no matter how hard you try. You cannot silence a voice that refuses to stay silent. You cannot erase a people who refuse to be erased. My ancestor held on to her soul in that slave quarter, protecting that tiny spark of dignity that no one could touch. And when I stood on that street corner with my life in ruins, I made the same choice she made. I chose to believe that I mattered. I chose to use my voice. I chose to fight back. The audience erupted in applause, but Amara raised her hand for silence. There was more she needed to say. But this isn't just my story, she continued. This is the story of millions of people who face discrimination every single day. The immigrant worker accused of stealing, the black professional passed over for promotion, the brown child told they don't belong, the refugee denied basic dignity and respect. Every single one of them is fighting the same battle my ancestor fought, the battle to be seen as fully human, to be treated with basic decency, to have their voices heard and their experiences validated. She leaned forward, her intensity growing. So what do we do about it? How do we break cycles of oppression that have lasted for centuries? It starts with refusing to stay silent. It starts with documenting injustice and sharing our stories. It starts with supporting each other, with building organizations like Esther's Voice that give people the tools to fight back. It starts with demanding accountability from institutions that perpetuate discrimination. And it starts with each of us examining our own hearts and asking whether we are part of the problem or part of the solution. Amara's voice softened, but her message remained powerful. I will never forget standing outside that hotel, feeling like my world had ended. I will never forget the humiliation, the anger, the sense of helplessness. But I also will never forget the moment I decided to fight back, to refuse to accept injustice as normal, to use my voice even when I was terrified of the consequences. That moment changed my life. And if my story can inspire even one person to stand up for themselves, to refuse to be silenced, to believe that they matter despite what the world tells them, then every moment of pain and struggle will have been worth it. The applause was deafening. People rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes. Amara looked out at them and saw faces of every color, every background, united in their commitment to justice and human dignity. She saw the legacy of Esther's wisdom, passed down through generations, finally bearing fruit in a movement that was changing hearts and minds across the nation. After the speech, a young woman approached Amara. She was maybe 20 years old, her face anxious, but hopeful. "Excuse me, Miss Johnson," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to thank you. I'm an immigrant too from Ethiopia. Last month, I was accused of stealing at my workplace, just like you. I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. But then I remembered your video. I remembered how you stood up for yourself, so I recorded what happened. I documented everything, and I contacted Esther's Voice. They helped me fight back, and I won. I got my job back, and my employer had to change their policies. None of that would have happened without you." Amara pulled the young woman into a hug, feeling tears prick at her own eyes. "You did this, not me," she said gently. "You found your voice. You stood up for yourself. I just showed you that it was possible." The young woman shook her head. "You did more than that. You gave me hope. You showed me that I matter, that my voice matters, that I don't have to accept injustice just because I'm an immigrant. You changed my life." As Amara watched the young woman walk away, she thought about the long chain of resilience that connected them. From Esther in the slave quarters teaching a young girl to protect her soul, to that young girl growing up and passing those lessons to her own children, to those children surviving Jim Crow and the civil rights era, to their descendants navigating a world that still saw them as less than, to Amara herself standing on that street corner making a choice, to this young Ethiopian woman finding the courage to fight back, each generation building on the struggles and victories of the last, each person adding their voice to a chorus that grew louder and more powerful with every passing year. The work was far from over. Discrimination and injustice still existed in countless forms. The systems that perpetuated inequality remained entrenched and resistant to change. There would be more battles to fight, more stories of pain and struggle, more moments when it would be easier to stay silent than to speak up. But there would also be victories, both large and small. There would be people who found their voices because of Amara's example. There would be policies changed, attitudes shifted, lives improved. There would be progress, uneven and incomplete, but real nonetheless. 10 years after posting that video, Amara received an invitation to speak at the Regency Grand Hotel. The hotel had undergone a complete transformation under new management. They had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training, established clear procedures for investigating accusations, hired a more diverse staff, and partnered with Esther's Voice to support immigrant workers throughout the hospitality industry. They wanted Amara to come speak to their employees about her experience and about creating a culture of respect and dignity. Amara accepted the invitation. Walking through those marble hallways again was surreal, filled with painful memories, but also a sense of how far she had come. She stood in the same conference room where she had once been humiliated and fired, now facing a room full of hotel employees who were there to learn from her story. As she began to speak, she saw faces that reminded her of her younger self, immigrant workers trying to build better lives, people who needed to hear that they mattered, that their voices deserved to be heard, that they had the power to fight back against injustice. And in that moment, Amara understood the true meaning of Esther's words from so long ago. They could take away your job, your home, your freedom, even your life, but they could never take away the essential truth of your humanity unless you let them. And as long as you held on to that truth, as long as you refused to be silenced, as long as you kept fighting for dignity and justice, they could never truly break you. The struggle continued, from generation to generation, from the cotton fields to the hotel hallways, from slavery to systemic discrimination, an unbroken chain of resistance and resilience. And Amara knew that her voice, joined with millions of others, would keep crying out until the day when everyone, regardless of color or origin or circumstance, would finally be seen and treated as fully human. From the cotton fields of 1850 to the marble floors of today, Amara's story reminds us that oppression changes its face, but the fight for dignity never ends. The chains may be gone, but the struggle for true equality continues. And every voice raised in protest, every story shared, every act of resistance, brings us one step closer to a world where everyone is treated with the respect and humanity they deserve.